Trendsetter, we've been talking a lot about how, who influences wrestlers to, go where they're at and why they want to get into the business. And, usually we talk about whether it being parents or grandparents. And the same thing goes for Randy Hogan, Randy. Like, you were influenced a lot by your grandparents, right?
My grandparents were 110% of my influence. They, gosh, I don't know. I was probably 4 or 5 years old when they started taking me to matches and watching it on TV every weekend. So I just grew up as a big fan, and that stayed with me my whole life. And to this very day, I'm still a big fan. So it was back in the day. They had, of course, I was from Detroit, and Dick the Bruiser and the Sheik and Bobo Brazil and all those old guys. And now I came up watching them, and just fascinated me the whole time until I finally had the opportunity to get into it myself and see what it was all about. And
So
here I am today.
So you went about it and you were in the restaurant business, but then you decided to live out your dream. Just talk a little bit about that and what kind of like was the driving force for you to go chase that dream.
Well, I'll try to make a long story short here. Like I said, I was a fan my whole life. Um, so I was managing a restaurant down in Boca Raton, and they closed the restaurant. And at that point, I decided to say, well, I want to see what this is all about. I used to play in a band before this, and did a Holiday Inn circuit in the South, and was playing in Columbus, Georgia on a regular basis at a Holiday Inn. And all the wrestlers used to stay there on Wednesday nights. They had matches at the auditorium in Columbus. And Jerry Oates owned a gym there, and a lot of the wrestlers would come in there and work out, and I worked out there also. Eddie Mansfield was there at the time, Marty Jannetty, guys like that. And so, anyways, they closed the restaurant, and I said, I really want to know what this wrestling's about. Is it real? Is it fake? What is it? So I called Jerry Oates and said, Jerry, do you know anybody down here that trains people? And he said, well, only one down there that I know is Hiro Matsuda at the time, who trained Hogan and a bunch of the other guys. He said, but he's very picky and very hard to get in with. He said, but I train guys up here too, which I knew he did. And again, Marty Jannetty was probably one of the bigger names that I remember. And so we went back and forth, and I ended up packing everything I had into my car. I was single at the time, and moved back up to Columbus, Georgia, and took a job managing a po' folks restaurant in Columbus, and went back to the gym, and I actually started training with Jerry in the back room of his gym. Now, we had no ring or nothing, so we learned on the cement floor with just a typical little gym mat on top of it. So you learn how to take a bump correctly real quick. Not much give to that cement floor. So I worked with him for a while, and I got hurt. And so I was out for about 6 or 7 months. So they're coming back, and in the meantime, between then and time I came back, his brother Ted Oates, who was also a wrestler there, rented a little storefront and had a ring and everything in it. So I went over to Ted's school and paid my dues and started training with him. And 13 months later, I had my first match. So it was a police athletic league, a freebie that we did, a benefit. And at that point, I said, this is great. I said, but I know what I know. I mean, I wanted to know what it was about, and I did it, and I had a match, so I'm done. So I'm back still wrestling or watching the wrestling on TV, going to the auditorium all the time, managing the restaurant. And I went to the matches, the auditorium, and a kid that I was training with was putting up the ring. I said, Bill, what are you doing? And he says, well, they rent my ring when they come into town. This was Georgia Championship Wrestling, part of Crockett's NWA at the time. So, he said, "You doing anything?" I says, "No." I says, "I'm not wrestling at all. What about you?" He says, "Yeah." I says, "I'm working in this little bar, some little town up in North Georgia." He says, "Why don't you come watch me sometime? Bring your stuff." And I said, "Well, I don't want to bring my stuff, but I'd like to come watch you." So I went 2 or 3 times to this little bar and always carried my stuff with me. And one day somebody didn't show up. So the promoter says, "You want to work?" Now, let me tell you, I was green and I didn't know nothing. Says, "You want to work?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "Okay, you're going to work against this guy named Animal, and he's going to go over." So I go back in the locker room to my buddy Bill. And I said, "Bill," he said, "this Animal's going to go over. Does that mean like I throw him over the top rope or something?" Bill says, "No, going over there, he's going to win, So that was my introduction to it. So I wrestled and got my brains beat out. Came back, said, "Can you come back the next week?" And I said, "Well, sure." So I did. And at that point, he says, "You kind of look like Hulk Hogan, who was just kind of on his way up now." He says, "So we're going to call you Hal Hogan." And I thought about it, and I says, "Well, okay, but can we change the Hal to Randy? Because I don't know who they're talking about if somebody says Hal." He says, "Okay, then you're going to be Randy Hogan." So that's how that all got started. So I worked the bar, I went home, and had my girlfriend bleach my hair blonde, and just continued on to that. Worked through the shows there, and different guys you work with work in different towns, different little shows and that. And so you go and you watch them, and common courtesy, they always introduce you to the promoters. And then once in a while they'll say, "Can you work? Can you work? You want to work?" So I started that way. And then all of a sudden started doing some Broadways, and then started winning, and just got little things just snowballed from there. And I finally got on a card that at that time the Indies every once in a while would bring in a big name, or at least somebody's on TV as a draw. And this one was, I think it was the Nightmare Danny Davis and Action Mike Jackson, who's the self-proclaimed Alabama junior heavyweight champion for about the last 40 years. And he was also on WCW and NWA. So anyways, talking to him, I said, "Mike," I says, "how do you get on TV?" Because at this time, there was a lot of, whatever you want to call them, enhancement, jobbers, carpenters. There was a lot of those guys around. So he said, "I bring guys up." He used to book some of them once in a while. He says, "I can't guarantee you get a match, but, why don't you come up?" So I did a couple of weeks in a row. Went up to TBS Studios where they were doing the TV tapings. And same story as that little bar. They were a guy short. And J.J. Dillon came out and said, "Hogan, you want to work?" I said, "Sure." So my first real match like that was on TV against the Warlord and the Barbarian. Yeah. So ended up having my nose broke. That the Barbarian was throwing me into the ropes, and he said, "Babu." So I'm nervous. My adrenaline's going. Babu. I don't know what he's saying. So I hit the ropes, came off full force, and next thing I know, I got like a size 14 right in my face. Just splattered my nose. Blood went gushing everywhere. So what he was saying was "big boot." Watch for the big boot. But all I heard out of the Samoan guy was "Babu." So JJ said, "Could you come back again?" And I said, "Well, yeah." So I started doing TV every week, and then the guys get to know you and what you can do. And he said, "Can you do some house shows?" And I said, "Well, sure." And then, "Can you travel?" And I said, "Well, sure." So that went on until I got Ted Turner bought it, turned it into WCW. At that point, they lost a lot of the enhancement people because I think it was Jim Herd and Bischoff and that. They wanted guys who actually knew how to work. And a lot of the jobbers at the time couldn't work a lick. So it was almost like an audition type thing. Well, I guess I did okay because they kept me on and George South and Italian Stallion and a bunch of guys like that, and we just continued to work at a regular basis. And I was in a match with Rick Steiner in Savannah, and he gave me a belly to back suplex. I'd wrestled him before and always hit my head. So he went behind me, so I'm going to turn a little bit, and I turned too much, ended up cracked my clavicle in the match. So that put me out for, I don't know, quite a while. Meantime, I said, okay, now what am I going to do? Because I was getting older, and it's harder and harder to heal. So I came down to Florida, my parents lived, and healed up, and I went back in the restaurant business. Well, they were going to close that restaurant. So I said, well, don't close it. Let me buy it. And they said, well, we don't have a franchise program. I said, well, let's start one. So I bought the restaurant. And in buying it, which was in Lakeland, Florida, the newspaper picked up on it. You know, ex-professional wrestler Randy Hogan just bought the restaurant and that. And I said, well, they're pushing Randy Hogan, so I'll keep the Randy Hogan alive as much as possible. So I made some phone calls, and this time the WCW was doing all their TV taping down here at Disney at MGM Studios. So when they did TV down here, I would go and do TV just to keep the Randy Hogan thing alive. And, kids would come in, and I'd have little 5x7 pictures I'd autograph and tell them, they'd ask about this guy and that guy and what's going to happen and that. And I'd always take time to talk to them. So I kind of became a Ronald McDonald. Mom and Dad asked the kids, where do you want to go have dinner? Oh, let's go see Randy Hogan, because they knew they'd get a picture out of the deal. And so that's what I did. So then I bought a second restaurant. I bought a third one. And this time I was married and then divorced, and I lost the second one. I lost the third one, and recouped and bought a couple more. So I ended up with a total of 7 through the years, and just sold my last one when I remarried about 8 years ago. And just living out here in Orlando. So that's the whole story right there.
Well, Randy, obviously you've had a long career, but does that word, for example, jobber, does that for you, does that bother you to when you hear that word? What exactly is it? Because there's a lot of wrestlers, again, that are in the position where they are, well,
that term has changed now. It's jobber, now it's enhancement talent.
To you, what does that mean?
Well,
is that an
Eric
insult?
Eric Bischoff is the one that said, I don't want to hear jobber again. You're called your enhancement. So that was an Eric Bischoff thing back in there. Does it bother me? No, it doesn't bother me again. I got a good friend down here, Bob Cook, best punch in the business, that he hates the word jobber. He says, no, you're a wrestler. Well, yes, you're a wrestler, but, wrestling is your job. And when you go to job, you're a jobber. There's so many terms, like you said, new terms come up, enhancement, carpenters, star makers, whatever. And at the time, we heard it and we just laughed. We say, hey, pin me, pay me. That was kind of the attitude. But I never really took it as a negative. I mean, I was not a big star. I wasn't a Hulk Hogan or a Ric Flair at the time, But, yeah, I'm on TV every week, but that doesn't make me a star. That's just my job happens to be wrestling on TV. Yours might be working in a shop all day. It doesn't really matter. A job is a job. So whether you call me a jobber or an enhancement talent or whatever, it doesn't bother me. I like the fact that they recognize me anyway, and I am a wrestler. I was a wrestler.
Yeah, well, it seems that
I'm still a wrestler.
Yeah, you're still a wrestler. You never retire. That's the job that never say never is what we've heard in this industry.
He'll show up to the signings with his bag and right next to him.
Yeah, he's ready. He's ready to go. He's got his gear ready to go, man. And that's something that we appreciate because that's the fan in us too, as you are a fan as well, Randy. So, but what I want to ask you though is,
I am a fan.
Yeah, you are still a fan. But when you look at the time when you're in the industry to when we compare it to now, and there's always comparisons, different eras, different different type of lifestyle too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were protective of the business back then. Didn't really want to showcase or show kayfabe, as they say now. Didn't really want to give too much away because it was that illusion, it was that artistry in terms of being a magician. You don't want to give away the secret of the
Just
trick
like a
being
magician.
done. But nowadays,
you're
it
absolutely
seems
right.
to be so much more open. What are your feelings about that compared to what the business was like when you were there, and what you look at it in terms of what the business is now, where it seems like a lot of people really know more of the behind the stage type of thing?
Well, back then, you had to pretty much know somebody to get into professional wrestling. There wasn't a school on every corner. There wasn't matches in a broken down ring in backyards and everything, and people jumping off rooftops onto fluorescent lights and stuff like that. There wasn't any of that stuff. There wasn't any internet or anything. So you had to know somebody, and if you got in, a lot of times they would try to get your attention to make sure you were tough enough. Hulk Hogan, when he started, he got his leg broke by Hiro Matsuga and came back. And there's other stories like that. Eddie Mansfield was another one that got his brains beat out, but kept coming back. And, we all got hurt, and myself included. But you keep coming back, and you earn a little respect. And that's what the veterans always looked for. Today, everybody's got a wrestling school. Everybody's better than the other one. Things are more gymnastic now. I mean, back in the day, you did anything off the top rope, a crossbody or a drop kick or something off the top rope. I mean, that's a finishing move. It's over. Now, all these finishing moves are just run-of-the-mill. You used to have sleeper holds. You don't see sleepers anymore. A lot of things you don't see anymore. Now, guys, almost all of them are muscled up. I mean, they're really built muscled up. Back then, you had guys with the beer bellies and hitting each other in the head full force with chairs and 2x4s and anything else, and there's blood squirting all over the place. Nowadays, it's softened a lot. Back then, a top guy might make $100,000 a year. Now, the mid-carders are making 4 or 5 times that. So the money is different. The wrestling is different now. It's much more flamboyant, gymnastic. I don't see the character development as much as it used to be. You get guys like the original Sheik or whatever; they were the same all the way through. Now, the guy's a heel, and 2 months later he's a baby, and then he jumps ship from WWE maybe to AEW or somewhere, and he changes his name. There's no consistency there. As far as the matches themselves, back in the day when they had territories and stuff, we had storylines. It would go 1 week to the next town, and you'd see the results and you'd follow them. It was much more of a soap opera where everybody couldn't wait to tune in to see what happened and what's going to happen next. They don't seem to have those storylines anymore. They're changing direction right and left. And again, so much of it is on the internet and spoilers and stuff that those are the biggest changes I see from an old schooler to the new one. And I think a lot of the old timers will tell the same thing. The biggest thing missing today is the deep storylines and feuds that they used to have.
Yeah, obviously that is something, the attention to detail. To me, Randy, when I see someone kick out of a DDT, it kind of bugs me because, back in the day, and I don't want to sound dated either, but like you really wouldn't, that'd be the finisher. You really wouldn't get out of it. So you mentioned some of the differences between wrestling then and now, but you're still a fan. So what are you a fan of now in wrestling today? What do you like?
Wow. I guess just the name wrestling keeps me a fan. I'm still a fan of WWE, Raw and SmackDown, my favorites. And I'll tell you why, and it goes back to the old days too. You get to know the characters, the wrestler. I put on AEW, I'll put on NXT, New Japan or something, and I don't know 80% of these guys or the names. I don't know anything about them. And they say in business, people want to do business with people that they like. Well, I think wrestling fans, especially the older ones, they like to see people that they know. I don't care if it's an old guy coming back like the Undertaker or Goldberg or something like that. And over here, you've got the names, like you got the Kenny Omegas and stuff that were big in Japan, but not well known over here to the old school guys. So the familiarity with the wrestlers, the characters, I think that's what keeps me watching what I watch. Is I just watch the same guys. Plus, a lot of the guys I was in the ring with that were just starting are now, getting toward the end of their career, and they're still around a lot. So, you got like Road Dogg, Dustin Rhodes. I was his very first TV match against him and
it was Kendall Windham, right?
Kendall Windham, yeah, the Young Broncos.
Yeah.
And the best compliment I ever got in that match was we were about halfway through it, and I was in there with Dustin, and he froze. He didn't do anything. He didn't call anything. He threw me in the corner and just literally froze. So I kind of called the rest of the match. I didn't think a thing about it. It didn't last very long. And I was getting dressed, and I was leaving, and Dusty was walking down the hallway as I was walking out. I never really had a conversation with him before other than hi. And he says, Hoagie. He called me Hoagie. He says, thanks for taking care of my boy. Now, I didn't say anything. I didn't know anything. But Dustin must have went and said, hey, Dad, this guy kind of, took care of me. He called that out, and it wasn't nothing except, throw me in and give me your dad's big elbow, and then Kendall gave me a bulldog headlock, and that was it. But anyways, that was the biggest compliment I ever got. That was Dustin's first match with Kendall.
And he's still going today, and you got to appreciate wrestlers that can reinvent themselves. Like Dustin's been in the business for over 20 years, and guys like Chris Jericho. Do you have any thoughts on Chris Jericho, a guy that can continually reinvent himself and the characters doesn't get stale? Because Bryan and I are tremendous fans of him and what he does, and just your thoughts on a guy like Chris Jericho.
Well, of course, I knew him. I was there when he was the young lion, just coming up and everything. The fact that he's avoided major injuries all these years is mind-boggling to me. But he's always really worked at it. He never went through the motions. He worked hard. He threw himself into the character. He's a nice person. He's a nice guy in real life to talk to and to mentor you a little bit. I think those are the things that keep a guy like him, keep him around, keep him going. A lot of the guys are around for a year or two, and all of a sudden they fizzle. Well, look at their attitudes in that. And there's all kinds of names that are, trying to relive what they used to have. Ken Shamrock being one of them, Shamrock's always trying to make another return now. And I see these guys at the conventions that we go to. A lot of them they just can't give it up. They just don't realize what they are and where they are right now and how they got there and why they didn't stay there longer. And Jericho still has basically the total package, as they used to call it. Now he's not in the shape that he used to be in, and he's got his Fozzy group to fall back on that, but he still cuts a great promo. He surrounds himself by other guys now. He's a great heel. He was a good baby, but I think he's a better heel. I just think it's wonderful that he's around. I hope he's got a few more good years in him. But he does a lot of work behind the stage too, and that's important. When you got a guy like him working with the young guys and stuff, that's what makes for a good show.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, Randy. And you were just talking, just to piggyback off what you were saying about Chris Jericho, something, again, that, like you said, I mean, he's getting up there in age. You know, he probably can't do all the things he used to do, or you know, he tries to do close to it. But at this stage in his career, he probably doesn't need to. And the one thing that Jeff and I talk about a lot, I'm sure this is something that you were just talking about too when we were comparing what life was like in the business when you started to where it is now. Ring psychology is something that's very underrated, I feel, right now, because you're right. There's a lot of athleticism here and a lot of ability, but in terms of, you know, making a move mean something, was it really necessary to do that? And really connecting with the audience sometimes seems to be something that's failed upon. So that leads me to my question here that I want to ask you is that you talked about training, how you prepared and how you were broken into the business when you first started. You said you were on cement floor, on a thin mat. You had to learn how to bump correctly really quick, otherwise you're going to suffer some serious injuries. Now you have the performance center. You have these areas, school on every corner, theoretically, in a sense. And the training's different. I remember something that Arn Anderson once said. He said when he compared the athletes they were back in his time to where they are now, he's like, they're babied in a sense, he said. Not in a bad way because, again, we're dealing with concussion protocols and people want to have more longevity, of course. But it seemed like back then, he said, you developed a callus because you're constantly on the go, so your body got used to it. Taking these breaks might tend to hinder people from getting injured more quickly. What's your thought process on the training from where it was when you started to where it's progressed now? Do you think it's for the better? Do you think it's for the good? Is there still a bit of old school in you in terms of mentality when it comes to training to be a professional wrestler?
You know, that's different to everybody. I think the biggest thing is the total focus has changed on the sport in general. Like you said, it's no longer about the long story. I mean, Hogan was the last really of the long champions, and Flair for a while, but like San Martino had it for 7 years, and Hogan had it a lot, and Lou says, how many years did he have it before? When you saw a world champion, you didn't see him on TV every week, or you didn't see him once a month on a special show or whatever. You might see him in your town maybe 2 or 3 times a year, you know, the Harley races and that. It just softened it, homogenized the business so much that titles means nothing. I mean, the Intercontinental title used to be really something, you know, when Valentine, Steamboat, and everybody had it. But now it's nothing. And I don't know what this 24/7 thing is going on, but that's what's taking away from the wrestling, the old school type wrestling. I don't think the art of storytelling is taught in these schools anymore. I don't think the art of selling is taught in these schools. I mean, watch it. When a guy punches a guy in the face. Now, if I punch you in the face, chances are you're going to put your hand up and you're going to grab your face, like, ouch, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Now, they'll hit him 5-10 times in the face and the head. Hands don't go up. They don't protect it. They might bob their head back a little bit, but that's it. You'll see a guy that's staggering around that can barely get up, and all of a sudden, he's full of energy. Now, you know, Hogan used to pump himself up, you know, start shaking the head and everything else, point the finger, you know, show the guy in, big boot, 3 punches, down he goes, drop the leg, and take it home. It's just not like that anymore. There's no storytelling anymore. There's not the art of selling anymore. Which if there's nothing else, as a jobber or wherever you want to call back in the day, if there's nothing else, you learn how to sell. Because with them old guys, if you didn't sell it, they did it for real. You'd sell it for real. I'm thinking old guys like Wahoo McDaniel. You talk about somebody giving you a chop, you know. Ronnie Garvin, another one. There's some tough guys, you know. If there's guys you have a problem with, they had WWE Bob Holly was kind of an enforcer for quite a while up there. And they've always had them. But it happened even some of the jobbers, some of the real green ones before WCW. I mean, I remember a guy that was wrestling against Eddie Gilbert. And he just totally screwed up Eddie's finish. Eddie come back and tore him a new one. And went to the office and said, I want to get fired. I don't want to see him again. And we never saw him again. And Eddie wasn't running the locker room or the gorilla position or nothing at the time. So, but that's how it was. If you didn't do it, you're out of here. Nowadays, they don't really have jobbers anymore. Well,
Yeah.
they don't have guys too often doing jobs, I should say.
Yeah, you see like on and off sometimes, like on Raw, or sometimes like get like that local talent, or there you go, or local talent, right, Randy? That's another word for it, right? A local talent, and they'll do that like for like the Viking Raiders. They had Eric Rowan, they had a couple guys, and it's still to me something that's still valuable in wrestling, where you can have a guy, because they had superstars, and you have the wrestlers come out, and then they take on, jobbers, enhancement talent, and that's a way for them to get recognized and get over before they went into their big feuds, or so to say. So I think to me the term and just the jobber is very underutilized right now in wrestling.
I do too. I totally agree. Totally agree. Guys like when they were building, like even Braun Strowman and stuff. These big guys, that's when they bring in the local talent and just job them out. They were doing that with Harper not too long ago. But that's the only time, you're right, you see them. And these guys, they bring right off the independent circuit, just local hometown boys, and they get their 15 minutes of fame, and that's it. The old days when they actually tried to build comical characters, I'm thinking of Gilbert.
Barry Horowitz.
Even me, I got a lot of work because of the Hogan look. And the reason that I got squashed against the Vaders, the Abdul the Butchers, and everything else was, I think they were wanting to show superiority over the WWF's Hogan at the time. Hogan was this great. Yeah, well, let me show you what we think of Hogan. And they beat my brains out.
Yeah. And
but
any brushback from Hogan or
kept me
anything like
working.
that, Randy?
No.
No?
Not a word.
No?
When he, the only time that we had really made any kind of eye contact at all was when he joined WCW, and they did a big parade at Disney when he announced that he was going. Him and Jimmy Hart were there, and I was there also, working for a radio station at the time, and he looked at me and just kind of nodded and winked, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of like acknowledging that, yeah, I see you, and that was it.
And
now
it's
funny. I mean, I go to gift shops down here, and we're just not an hour away from each other, cross paths all the time, but never in the same place at the same time. Wow. All these years.
Wow. And somebody else that you've mentioned that you're a fan of too is you're a big fan of Jim Cornette and what he does. And so you got to put the story, whether it's true or not, you're going to confirm it or not. So he did refer to you on his podcast. He did ask about what happened to Randy Hogan. And, of course, he said you're a really nice guy. And there's a point where you're doing an interview with Bill Apter, and I guess everyone was ribbing you about the Hogan thing. So when you're talking to Bill Apter, they're kind of giving up the 24-inch pythons because, you're spoofing Hogan. And then he's kind of like putting up the 14, because, to like signify like the 14-inch pythons. Any truth to that?
Well, yeah, that was it. It was done at a TV taping. We were after a TV taping. After was there, and then says, "Come here, I got an idea." So they had the picture of Blassie next to Hulk, pointing at the 24-inch pythons, and after says, "Come here," and Cornette said, "Well, damn, I'll be a part of that." So Cornette played Blassie's part, and he said, "Now put your arm up. Look mean, but don't flex." So that's what we did. And they had an article, and it was in Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Hulkamania versus Randamania. Just kind of a rib a bit on me, looking for my first win on TV, and maybe he has a lot of fans out there, maybe he doesn't. It wasn't all negative. It was just kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. But that was very true. And again, back in the day when we wrestled WCW, there was a point where the over guys, the big guys, actually had a voice in who they worked on TV. And there was a couple of them that liked to work me because I didn't weigh that much. And I could fall any which way. I could take anything they gave me, any kind of a hold or any kind of whatever, and sell it. So guys like Sting and Luger, always the Midnight Express, they always wanted to work with me because they knew they could do whatever they wanted, and I'm not going to be whining or crying in the back. And and there's another part of it. They don't teach anymore. If you have a bad match with somebody, whatever, and when you get back to, you thank them for the match. I don't care who it is. You don't wait for the guy to come up to you. You go up to him. You introduce yourself in the locker room when you get there. That's just locker room courtesy. And after the match, you thank him, even though he might have beat your brains out. They don't teach that anymore, I don't think. It's just an old unwritten rule. I mean, I only got really beat up twice that I remember. And again, both times, I learned a lesson by it, and I got some good experience from it, even though it was kind of hurtful at the time.
Well, RANDAMANIA will be running wild at the big event on March 7th. That's coming up really soon at LaGuardia Plaza. Yeah, in East Elmhurst, New York. Getting back on there. Excited about it, huh?
Oh, I tell you, I'm so excited to get up there. Now, I'm not excited about leaving Florida and going up to that snow-type weather you got up there. But as far as getting up there and seeing some fans and all this, and again, we'll be at the LaGuardia Plaza Hotel there on the 7th, and then on the 8th we'll be up at WrestleFest in Albany at the Colonial Mall.
Listen, Randy, we're not gonna feel sorry for you. We're gonna feel sorry for you because you have to spend a couple days here in the winter that is New York City. But to give you a report, it is kind of mild. It's been like an easy winter for us, knock on wood, so it shouldn't be too bad for you. But it'll be part of the D365 promotions. Kevin Nasta, we know him really well, and
he's wonderful.
It's going to be a good time. We saw the little spoof there for you on his Facebook page, so definitely it's going to be a good time, man. Mm-hmm. And fans, go out there and meet Randy Hogan, man. Randy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I can't wait to see all you guys up there.
Yep. Take care, Randy.